Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling one of history's most incredible chain reactions. We're talking about how a king's, well, let's just say complicated love life, didn't just cause a scandal. Oh no, it sparked a full-blown revolution that would change a country forever.
I'm sure you know the rhyme, right? It's that grim, simple summary of Henry VIII's 6 wives. But here's the thing. That little mnemonic, it doesn't even begin to cover the real story. It's just the tip of a much bigger, more transformative iceberg.
So that's what we're going to do. We're going to connect the dots and see how one king's desperate quest for a son ended up completely upending his country's religion, its economy, and its entire social fabric.
Our story actually kicks off not in a bedroom, but on the world stage. It's 1520, and King Henry VIII is really at the peak of his powers. He's young, he's ambitious, and he's desperate to show everyone, especially his rivals, just how powerful he is.
Just look at this. This is the Field of the Cloth of Gold. This wasn't just some meeting. It was an 18-day-long festival of pure spectacle. So lavish, so over the top, that it literally bankrupted some of the nobles who were forced to attend. This whole thing was a massive flex, a show of force between Henry and his great rival, Francois I of France.
And the dynamic between these two guys was just fascinating. They were both young, super ambitious, totally locked in this power struggle. But, they also had this kind of grudging respect for each other. At one point, they even challenged each other to a wrestling match, which, by the way, Francois won pretty easily, and you can bet Henry was not happy about that.
But here's the thing. Here's the problem. For all his power, for all the pageantry and palaces, Henry's entire dynasty was incredibly insecure. It all rested on the life of just one person, his daughter, Mary. And this wasn't just a personal problem for him. In that era, it was a genuine national security crisis.
And this deep, deep vulnerability led to what everyone at the time started calling the king's great matter. It was an obsession that, as it turns out, would change absolutely everything. This whole national crisis really found its spark in Henry's infatuation with one of Catherine's own ladies-in-waiting, the sharp and captivating Anne Boleyn. Henry became totally convinced that she, and only she, could give him the son he so desperately needed.
But, it wasn't that simple. Henry's argument was, let's just say, biblically debatable. Catherine was completely steadfast, and, this is the most important part, the Pope was basically a political prisoner of Catherine's nephew, Charles V. And Charles V was the most powerful man in Europe. So there was just no way the Pope could grant the annulment without making him furious. Henry was completely and utterly stuck.
So Henry had a choice to make. He could either abandon his quest for an heir or abandon the thousand-year authority of the Catholic Church. He chose a radical path, one that would get him a new wife and an unbelievable amount of new power.
And in just a few short years, boom, he completely redrew the map of power. In 1533, his own hand-picked archbishop annuls the marriage. Then, in 1534, the Act of Supremacy makes him the head of the church. And then, in 1535, he passes an act that would unlock a massive new source of wealth.
You see, this new supreme power wasn't just about theology or getting married. It was a neat solution to another one of Henry's big problems. He was always broke. He constantly needed cash for his wars and his incredibly lavish lifestyle.
So, the crown started systematically. They went after all the monasteries with an annual income below £200. The official reason? Oh, rooting out corruption. But the real motive, the financial one, was staring everyone in the face. This was just the first step in a massive, state-sponsored asset grab.
And the scale of this thing, it's just staggering to think about. Monastic lands were estimated to be somewhere between 5 and 16% of all the land in England. This wasn't just closing a few religious houses, this was fundamentally reshaping the entire kingdom's wealth structure.
And the process was ruthless. Bells that have called people to prayer for centuries were melted down to make cannons. But the real prize? The land. By selling it off to his supporters, Henry didn't just get cash. No, he created a whole new class of wealthy landowners whose fortunes were now tied directly to the success of his new church.
But as you can imagine, a sweeping revolution like this doesn't just happen without a fight. It sparked huge, violent rebellions and, at the same time, set the stage for even more tragedy back at the court.
The reaction was definitely not quiet acceptance. It was outrage.
Tens of thousands of people, especially in the north of England, rose up in a rebellion that came to be known as the Pilgrimage of Grace. For these people, the monasteries weren't these corrupt places the king claimed they were. They were the heart of their communities, providing charity, healthcare, and spiritual comfort.
And what's fascinating is that modern research shows a direct link here. The data makes it pretty clear that these rebellions weren't just random. They were far more likely to break out in the exact places where these smaller, local monasteries, the ones people really depended on, were being torn down.
And you can see the evidence right here in the data. So in the counties where there was no rebellion, that orange slice representing the smaller, threatened monasteries is tiny. But now look at the counties that did rebel. That slice is dramatically larger. This tells us it wasn't just about religion. The very real economic and social shock from these closures was a direct trigger for the revolt.
And all this time, the king's personal drama was nowhere near finished. After he executed Anne Boleyn for failing to give him a son, the tragic cycle just kept going. He finally got his heir, Edward, with his third wife, Jane Seymour, but she tragically died just days after giving birth. His fourth marriage to Anne of Cleves was a political disaster that ended in a quick annulment. Then came the very young Catherine Howard, whose past came back to haunt her, leading to her execution. And finally, there was Catherine Parr, the widow who actually survived him and helped bring a little stability in his final years. It was just this relentless story of hope, disappointment, and bloodshed.
So there you have it. You can see how a story that started with one man's very personal problem, his desperate need for a son, completely snowballed into a total transformation of an entire nation.
And the consequences of all this were permanent. Henry's actions created a brand new national church, forged a new social class that was loyal to the crown, centralized power in the monarchy like never before, and set England on a completely different political and religious path, one that in many ways defines it to this very day.
So in the end, how do we think of him? Was he a forward-thinking religious reformer? A tyrant driven purely by ego and lust? Or maybe just a brilliant opportunist who saw a personal crisis as the perfect chance to seize ultimate power? You know, maybe he was all three, a complex, ruthless, and powerful figure whose personal desires ended up forging a new nation.